Good afternoon and welcome everybody to this edition of the Daily Friend Show. As you'll see, we are once again sorry, had to do that. He is hopefully enjoying himself hugely in the US of A, and we are going to look at issues that affect the S of A, and it's not looking good. But then, what do we expect? The first topic we're going to look at is the Eskom executive who's been fingered in being responsible for planning outages, or rather sabotage that result in outages that ultimately causes load shedding. The way in which he works is that he sabotages, arranges to have sabotaged power generating units at targeted stations in collusion with a forensic auditor. Also uses Eskom engineers and unemployed artisans, and therefore they cause the breakdowns, and then you get the load shedding. And most of it came out in a bunch of leaked WhatsApp messages. And the security agencies are very worried because, they gave this particular executive, who yet remains unnamed, security clearance when he came on board. Although I suspect, at the time he probably didn't have any reason not to be cleared. His misconduct started to occur later on. And I'd like to just read through the WhatsApp exchange, because it has to be heard, read, seen to be believed. And it goes something like this. Co-conspirator, sabotage operation. Can we focus on strategic power stations, mostly in the Witbank area? Executive, I know you're disappointed with Matimba power station issue. I have a-holes all over me. Conspirator, I was disappointed. I thought you had everything under control. That was supposed to be a sabotage issue. Pay us and we move to the next target. Simple. Executive, some idiot with his head in his ass jumped in. You have to have access to Duva or Matla? You have people there? Or can we use my crew? I also managed to get an engineer at Hindrina who is game. Conspirator, Matla, yes, we can get a guy or his crew. We used him on that incident in May at Unit 1. They prefer doing it just outside of the perimeter. They have a team of unemployed artisans we can use at any time, but it comes with a price. Exec, okay, let's meet tomorrow and delete this communication from your phone. We can use them. We can soon use the same modus operandi. Conspirator, as long as you classify it as sabotage and appoint us to investigate, then we are in the money and game. Executive, done. Now, there are apparently two security companies fingered in this as well. Gerrie, what is your take on this disclosure, shall we say?
Yeah. It's that obvious situation of the callers coming from inside the house, and the problem is that it's endemic. It seems, this is typical of what happens not only at Eskom but across a broad range of our state-owned enterprises, and why there hasn't been enough steps taken to root out this corruption, because so many people are implicated and so many people are participating in these inside jobs. And what is also particularly shocking is just the amount of greed that is involved. I mean, this executive probably takes his take-home pay is something to be desired by anybody, but yet he'd rather have this country be on the verge of a nationwide blackout, which affects every household's ability to have an income. I mean, our middle class macro review that we produced yesterday showed that around 70% of middle class households have seen their household costs increase because of load shedding. And a third of respondents in that survey indicated that they have had a loss of income because of load shedding. And another third have indicated that they've completely lost their income. They've lost work opportunities because of load shedding. I mean, load shedding has such a devastating impact, affecting the cost of living, affecting how the economy functions, and it just shows the indifference that the people at the top have, that many people at Eskom have, about how load shedding affects the South African society. So, I mean, these WhatsApp messages just shows, how entrenched this attitude is how can we have more? Yeah.
Marius, what's your sense with the fact that although he's a senior person, he's not one of the two ministers alleged to be involved in the mafias that are destroying Eskom? Do you think there's likely to be any quicker legal action against someone like this?
No, I mean, I think the South African justice system works pretty slowly, and I think especially if you have a little bit of money, I think, and obviously somebody like who's an Eskom executive, as Harry said, he's probably somebody with some means. So, but we've seen, I mean, it's not very often that there's consequences for wrongdoing in South Africa, especially if you somebody who's sort of on the, got an inside track. And I think somebody who's an Eskom executive is probably fairly well connected. So they'll, I'll be very surprised if anything comes out of this, and if somebody actually does go to jail, or even if we get to a prosecution stage, I don't think that'd be, probably what's going to happen to them is exactly the same what's going to happen to the two ministers that have been implicated, which is probably nothing, even if we ever find out if these ministers were or alleged to have been involved in this kind of thing. But I think, it's definitely, and it's not an exaggeration to say it's literally sabotage and it's treason. Even without this, we probably would have seen some level of load shedding, but this has definitely made load shedding worse. And as Harry points out, this led to people losing jobs and so on. We know people have actually died because of load shedding. There's, there was the fairly recent case now that came out. I think it was a young little girl. She was 4 or 5 or something, and she died because of that. But I mean, she's definitely not the only person. I'm sure in the hundreds, if not thousands, of people have died because of not having electricity to power certain kinds of machines that keep them alive. And I'm sure there have been issues in hospitals where hospitals have lost power, and this led to people dying. So I mean, this has literally led to people's deaths. But as we know, in South Africa, there's no consequences for anything. I mean, I've said this on the show before, and it's still something that really upsets me. Like when Collins Khoza was murdered, I mean, not one person has even lost a job. We all know what happened to the people who killed George Floyd in the United States. That the policeman responsible is in jail today. Not one person has faced any consequences of killing Collins Khoza or any other people. Or I mean, this often happens when the police are involved in killing South Africans. The list is very long of South Africans killed by the police when nothing happens. And I think this is part of, there's no accountability in South Africa, and this is part of it. So, I mean, this person, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say they committed treason, and it's very likely nothing will happen to them.
Harry, could it almost be, in light of what Marius is saying, that it's so big and it's so public, it's a bit like, when Stalin said, one death is a tragedy, 6 million is a statistic. So in other words, it's out there, we see it, we're all affected by it. But there is so much protection offered by the ANC to its own that they will go on regardless. And the agencies like the police and the NPA, which are supposed to be working for us, just will never really get there. And certainly probably not before the election.
Yeah, I think we were one of the first institutions in the country to be quite skeptical of the whole Ramaphosa circumstance. President Ramaphosa coming in, he's going to clamp down on corruption effectively, but from our own research and from what we've seen and what we've looked into, corruption is part of, it's endemic. It's the culture of the ruling party. There's absolutely no consequences, and so it's such an entangled web of irregularities and corruption that it's just impossible to deal with it in a efficient way, because everybody's protecting one another. There's too many people involved. So yeah, I don't think this is something that can be effectively addressed by the current administration until we've seen a major political shift, whether that be a new political party comes in power or a new coalition comes in power, or the ANC just gets so pressured by the loss of an election that they finally start to get the right man in the right position, and they start making reforms. But even a loss of election doesn't seem to be that scary for the ANC. I mean, they're about to lose their 50% majority, and that hasn't really, encouraged them to pull the brakes on everything that's happening. So it's just a business as usual.
Well, I think my last comment on that is it's the sheer extent across society. And I read somewhere, and I can't remember where it was, is that one country literally sacked its police force and replaced them with a new one because of exactly that sort of thing. They were so corrupt. There was, you couldn't save it. You couldn't do anything with it that would be useful for society. So maybe we'll have to sack the police force, because one of the problems that we'll probably face with if the ANC loses is that it still has tentacles in the public sector, and whoever takes over, if anyone takes over, they will have to deal with that public sector. Right, a couple of stories that are sort of linked together, and the one is the DA is challenging the president's decision to hide the findings into the alleged arms shipment to Russia. Now, basically what the president has now decided is, I'm sure this will be considered classified or top secret or in the interests of the country, etc., etc. Even though it's wide out there, we all now know about it. The only thing we don't know is what went onto the ship and where did it then go to. But everything else we know. Marius, I maybe know the answer to this, but it's almost like the chutzpah of actually making this, of deciding that this will not be disclosed to the public. Can they get away with it?
Well, I mean, I think that we all know the answer to that. And I think it just comes back to the issue of accountability, and who knows what happened with that Lady R ship. I wouldn't be surprised if there was some elements within the military or the SANDF who actually did supply the Russian ship with weapons without anybody else within the government knowing. But I mean, this whole thing is all quite strange. As far as I understand, it's the kind of hardware that we have isn't really compatible with the stuff that the Russians would use anyway. So I mean, people need to come clean on this thing, because because there's lots of speculation about whether we actually did get him weapons. As I say, we don't even know. The kind of stuff we use isn't compatible with what Russians use. So I think it would make things much more clearer if we could actually just have a clear picture. And even, I mean, the way that South Africa was accused in the first place, it did seem the US ambassador was shooting a little bit from the hip, and he didn't seem to have all that much evidence. Lots of it was speculation and seemed to be hearsay and so on. But then the best thing would be to to come clean with the public and say this is exactly what's happening. Because there's also been speculation that this was simply an order that had been placed even before COVID that we were fulfilling. And if that's the case, then, I mean, that's all above board. But if it's not, then some heads will need to roll. But as we know, heads, if you are connected in South Africa, especially if you hype in the government or whatever the case is, I mean, or if you have links to the correct people in the ANC, or you're pretty safe, nothing's going to happen. I mean, the litany of people who've got away with things in South Africa, it's it could fill I don't know, tomes of books of people who've got away with wrongdoing in this country.
Yeah, it's again, it's a sort of everything's in plain sight, so we'll keep it secret. And of course, whatever was loaded needn't have necessarily gone off to Russia. It could have gone off to one of the countries that is sort of friendly with Russia on the African continent, because the ships stopped at a few, and offloaded there for some or other reason. Either the Wagner Group needed stuff, or one of the parties in the Sudan conflict needed stuff. Harry, what do you think they could possibly use as an excuse for not revealing this information that would genuinely be considered a sort of state secret, because it's not in the public interest given the security needs of the state?
I don't know, Sara, but the silence is deafening, and it definitely makes us look somewhat complicit when we don't want to release the findings. And I think that perception is anything, and if the international community or the West, which is our biggest trading partners, by the way, perceive that we are assisting Russia in any way, then that's going to have huge economic implications for us. I mean, in our risk alert that we released yesterday, we also noted some of the ramifications that could occur if the West decided to implement similar sanctions against South Africa, like they did to Russia. And as I've mentioned, the EU, the United States, they're our biggest trading partners, and Russia only is a small fraction of the trade in comparison to countries in Europe. So if we lose the trust of our biggest trading partners and the investors from those regions, I mean, we're going to sit with a huge, we're going to sit with huge capital outflows. We don't have the domestic investment capability to fund our own roads and water infrastructure and whatever else we need to keep this economy going. So, it's South Africa is a small boat in a big ocean. And I think it's quite telling that, there's the saying, birds of a feather flock together, or,
That's right. Yeah.
The thing is if that South Africa is friends with Venezuela and Russia and Iran. We're getting closer with Iran. All these countries that have very shoddy records with human rights and in terms of their economic policies. So I think South Africa's silence and neutrality on the whole thing also says a lot about where South Africa actually stands.
Marius, sort of allied to this is the BRICS summit that was held in Cape Town last week, and the meeting between foreign ministers, where interested potential countries who may want to join BRICS attended, and they included such human rights luminaries as the United Arab Emirates, Argentina, which is probably not that bad, but economically is a disaster, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and the Islamic Republic of Iran. I think Syria is in there somewhere. And that, to me, Pandor said at this meeting that, the West, we don't share an understanding any longer. She didn't use the words the West, but basically she meant that we no longer share an understanding with the West as to the greatest global challenge, which she says is poverty. She says a number of things, including, that the West they haven't met the South's demands. One can query that. But it seems like there's the government, at least, if not, has really nailed its colours to the mast of the BRICS countries and whoever might be allied to the BRICS that is not in the West, and that it doesn't matter what the West is giving us from an economic point of view. Things are shifting.
It does seem to be, for some reason, we definitely seem to be allying. There seems to be a knee-jerk anti-Western, kind of bent in our foreign policy. But I wanted to go back to something that Harry was saying with looking at countries with the human rights records and so on. I don't think, the West can't really point fingers at anybody, especially a place like the United States, I don't think. I can't remember who it was, but somebody said no country has friends, you only have interest. And I think that's completely correct. If you look at somewhere like the United States, they've been a great supporter of Saudi Arabia for many years. And because they get oil from Saudi Arabia, they're opposed to the Iranian regime in the Middle East and so on. But we know Saudi Arabia is one of the worst countries when it comes to human rights records on the planet. It's probably one of the worst places, maybe after Afghanistan, to be a woman on earth. And it's worse. I think. I'm open to correction, but I think their record in women's rights is worse than a place like Iran. But Iran's obviously got. Iran's not definitely. It's not a place with a good human rights record. But I think if we're looking at the Prussian Olympics, Saudi Arabia is definitely worse than a place like Iran. So I think but simply from that point of view, South Africa should be more on the side of the West because of our trading and other economic ties with the West. I do think China is our biggest trading partner at the moment, but it's definitely in China's favor. We buy a lot more things from them than the other way around. Whereas places like the EU and the US, it's as far as I understand, it's the other way around. So they buy a lot more of our stuff than, especially and we get the benefits from AGOA and so on. So while I don't think there's any reason to either automatically be on the side of the West or automatically on the side of, say, the BRICS countries, I do think we need to see what's best for South Africa. And I think being allied with countries, say, like India, which is a democracy, at least for now. It's also got good, strong historical ties with South Africa. That's somebody we should look to, if we do want to build some kind of, counterweight to the West. I think countries like India and Brazil are definitely places to look at, rather than obviously China and Russia, which aren't democracies, even though they have their, especially China is going to be the biggest economy in the world pretty soon, if it's not already. So, but yeah, I think, I don't think there's anything wrong with South Africa looking to BRICS for our own interests, but just we are cutting off our nose to spite our face by, going against the United States and so on, who just simply from an economic point of view is, there's somebody that we need on side, especially compared to Russia, where our economic ties with Russia are much smaller than that with the United States and the EU and the rest of the West.
Yeah, no, in fact, again, I read an article that talked about the fact that you could be, well, to use the term non-aligned, by just being diplomatically much more sussed and much more careful. And they mentioned countries like India as countries, and probably even Brazil, who sort of essentially have relations with both camps, if I can put it that way. And the issue is not having the varied relationships, it's how you achieve them. And South Africa, the lack of finesse is, shall we say, blinding. I mean, it's as if the 30 years of ANC rule has not taught the ANC anything about diplomacy. Surely diplomacy is what coats the grubbiness of having of pursuing our interests. So I think that's part of what our problem has been, is that we've sort of gone for broke, and we're going to pay the price for that because we're just so clumsy at it. Oh, lots to say on that. The next issue is it was comment made by William Gumede, the political commentator and author, who expressed grave concern about the enormously high extent of immigration by skilled, experienced people. They are qualified. They are exactly the skills South Africa needs and doesn't have enough of. And as a consequence, we lose skills, we lose money, we lose investment. And these are the sort of people that one needs to create an environment where businesses are established and people are employed. And like everything else in South Africa, it is just disappearing. And we may be have way too few skills to rely on enough people to take us out of this mess, given the fact that the ANC is not the entity to create businesses and jobs. Harry, your response to that?
Yeah, it's like you say, we have completely destroyed the fundamentals in this country that would attract, first of all, to retain our skilled workers, and second of all, to attract skilled workers from other regions. And it's getting so dire that, I'm experiencing it in my own personal life. A few years ago, 10 years ago, I would always hear about someone's nephew or someone's former colleague immigrating. But now, on Saturday afternoon, I had one last social with two friends who are now immigrating. It is, as you say, it's a huge loss for the country. It's not just people taking their money with them, but it's also people taking their qualifications, their work experience, starting businesses, employing people in other countries, and yeah, it's impossible to have a sustainable economic growth rate when the best of the best of your society doesn't want to contribute to this country anymore because they're being chased away by high crime rates, by the fact that there are potholes right in front of their suburbs, right in front of their homes. You don't have something as basic as electricity. What reason is there to still, now you have to also fund your own services from your own pocket? The incentive to stay in South Africa and contribute to the society, there are none. So that's on us, basically.
The only reason I can think of to stay is the weather, and that's sort of not a small thing, but in the circumstances, Marius, it's clear from what William Gumede says that we're not talking about the flight of white skills. We're talking about the flight of skills across all races. Do you think there's a perception in government that perhaps it's sort of disgruntled whites who are leaving, and therefore, it's not quite as serious as we say it is?
Yeah, I think that's probably still a perception. I actually remember Richard Spoor on Twitter a little while ago. He tweeted a photo, I think, of his nephew that was immigrating to New Zealand. And the comments were horrendous, saying things like, good, the racist must leave and all this kind of stuff. And I think there is a perception that it's just whites leaving, but that's clearly not the case. Maybe a couple of years ago that was, but I think increasingly there's people of different races, black, white, colored, whatever it may be, looking for a better future for their children and themselves abroad. You can't really blame people. South Africans are probably poorer now than we were in 10 years ago, and the economy continues to decline. And as Harry says, you're sitting in the dark and there's potholes outside your house, and this is if you're lucky enough to be in the middle class. Imagine, that a lot of people in this country don't even have proper housing and whatever, and no hope of actually getting a better life. And that's got all kinds of implications for, sustainability of the country. And just on the fact, we're losing skills. Nobody who's skilled wants to come to South Africa. And we aren't even, and it doesn't seem we can even build our own skills here. We recently saw that report that said 80% of, I think it was grade 5s, can't even read for meaning. So we're losing skills that are already here. We can't attract skills, which is, developed countries around the world. That's often what they do. They just manage to, instead of training their own people, they get people from abroad. But we can't even train our own people. Yeah, and it's a bit of a problem, I think. So I don't know how to put it.
Well, I think essentially what the government has to understand is that it doesn't matter who you are. If you've got skills, you can move, and there is plenty of demand post the pandemic in many of the what would be economically attractive countries. I'll bring it to a close then, and thank my colleagues who I failed to introduce at the beginning of the program, Gerbrandt van Heerden and Marius Roodt. And let's go outside and sit in the sun, because I can't recommend terribly much else at this stage. And otherwise, join us, Nick Free, tomorrow again at 1:30. Thanks very much.